In the small town of Ridgewood, life moved at a predictable pace. The heartbeat of the community was its high school, where Friday night football games brought everyone together, parents, teachers, and students alike. It wasn't just about touchdowns or cheering. It was tradition, pride, and belonging, all rolled into one. And at the center of it all was the cheerleading squad, the shining stars who lit up every game with their energy and skill. This year, though, something new shook things up. A new student arrived halfway through the semester, transferring from another state due to her father's job relocation. She was 16, confident, and carried herself with a quiet grace that made people notice her immediately. But what really set her apart wasn't just her personality. It was the fact that she was one of only 2 black students in the entire school. In a place as homogeneous as Ridgewood, standing out wasn't always easy. Her name isn't important here, but what mattered was how quickly she became part of the fabric of the school, or at least tried to. On her first day, whispers followed her down the hallways. Some were curious, others judgmental, but none of them knew much about her yet. What they did know was that she had joined the cheerleading team after impressing the coach during tryouts. Her moves were sharp, her stunts flawless, and her ability to lead was undeniable. Within days, she earned a spot as the team's lead flyer, a role usually reserved for seniors or longtime members. For most, this would have been seen as an incredible achievement, proof of hard work paying off. But not everyone celebrated her success. There was a group of girls on the cheerleading squad who weren't happy about the newcomer stealing the spotlight. Their leader was someone who had grown used to being the center of attention. Let's call her the Queen Bee for now. Before the new girl arrived, she had been the star flyer, the one everyone looked up to. Losing that position didn't sit well with her, and soon enough, resentment bubbled under the surface. At first it was subtle, a snide comment here, a dismissive laugh there. Nothing too obvious, nothing anyone could point fingers at. But those little jabs added up, chipping away at the new girl's confidence bit by bit. Things escalated when the new girl started hearing rumors about herself. People said she only got the lead spot because the coach felt sorry for her, or worse, that she somehow manipulated her way into it. None of it was true, of course, but lies spread faster than truth ever could. The whispers grew louder, reaching ears outside the squad. By the time the first big game rolled around, the atmosphere around her was tense, charged with unspoken hostility. It wasn't just words either. During practice sessions, the Queen Bee and her clique found ways to make things difficult. They'd intentionally drop her during stunts, pretending it was an accident. Once, while stretching near the bleachers, she found her water bottle spilled inside her gym bag, soaking everything. Another time, someone scribbled hurtful phrases on her notebook, leaving it open on her desk for everyone to see. Each incident was small on its own, but together they formed a pattern, one designed to isolate her and make her feel unwelcome. At home, she kept these struggles to herself. Her father, a Navy SEAL, was a man of discipline and strength. He'd taught her from a young age to face challenges head-on, to never let anyone push her around. Yet, despite his lessons, she hesitated to tell him what was happening. Maybe it was pride, maybe fear of appearing weak, or perhaps the hope that things would improve on their own. Whatever the reason, she chose to endure silently, putting on a brave face whenever he asked how school was going. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, her father noticed something different about her demeanor. She picked at her food absent-mindedly, her usual spark missing. Sensing something was wrong, he gently probed. "What's bothering you?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. After some hesitation, she opened up, sharing bits and pieces of what she'd been facing. Tears welled up in her eyes as she described the bullying, the isolation, and the weight of feeling like an outsider. Her father listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. When she finished, she begged him not to step in, fearing it might make things worse. Reluctantly, he agreed, for now. But what she didn't realize was that her father wasn't the kind of man to sit idly by while his child suffered. Even if he respected her wishes not to intervene directly, he couldn't ignore the situation entirely. Years of training as a Navy SEAL had taught him to assess threats carefully, to anticipate problems before they spiraled out of control. And as far as he was concerned, this was a problem waiting to explode. So quietly he began gathering information, texts, notes, even asking around subtly without raising suspicion. If the bullies thought they could intimidate his daughter, they were sorely mistaken. Little did they know, their actions were about to collide with a force far greater than anything they'd ever encountered. For the new girl, life at Ridgewood High was proving to be more complicated than she'd imagined. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between fitting in and staying true to herself. But deep down she knew she couldn't keep quiet forever. Something had to give, and soon it would. The bullying didn't stop after the first few weeks. If anything, it got worse. The group of girls who had taken an instant dislike to the new cheerleader seemed to grow bolder with each passing day. They weren't just content with spreading rumors or making snide comments anymore. Their actions became more calculated, more personal. It was as if they were testing how far they could go before someone stepped in to stop them. During practice sessions, the tension was palpable. Every time the new girl climbed onto the pyramid for a stunt, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And often, she was right. One afternoon while attempting a flip, one of the base members accidentally shifted just enough to throw her off balance. She landed hard on the mat, wincing in pain, but brushing it off when the coach asked if she was okay. The queen bee smirked from the sidelines, pretending to stretch while muttering loud enough for others to hear. Some people just aren't cut out for this. It wasn't just during practice either. In the locker room, things escalated in ways that made the new girl feel even smaller. Her gym bag would mysteriously end up in the wrong spot, sometimes filled with crumpled paper or smeared with sticky substances. Once she opened her locker to find all her clothes soaked in water. Someone had clearly tampered with it. When she complained to the coach, the response was lukewarm at best. "Maybe you should double-check your lock," the coach suggested, shrugging it off as carelessness on her part. But the worst moment came when they started targeting her appearance. The new girl took pride in her natural hair, styling it in intricate braids that turned heads wherever she went. To her, it was a symbol of identity and confidence. To the bullies, it was another thing to mock. During a team meeting, the queen bee leaned over and whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Doesn't she know we're supposed to look uniform? Not like that." A few girls giggled nervously while others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. The comment stung deeply, cutting through any armor of resilience she'd built so far. At home, she tried to downplay everything. Her father noticed the changes, of course, he always did. He saw how tired she looked, how quiet she became during meals, and how she avoided talking about school altogether. One night, as they sat watching TV together, he turned to her and said, "You've been carrying something heavy lately. Want to talk about it?" His voice was gentle, but there was no mistaking the concern in his eyes. She hesitated, torn between wanting to confide in him and fearing what might happen if she did. Finally, she broke down, telling him everything. The whispered insults, the sabotaged routines, the constant feeling of being watched and judged. As she spoke, tears streamed down her face, and for the first time in weeks she allowed herself to be vulnerable. Her father listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable but his presence steady and reassuring. When she finished, she pleaded with him not to do anything drastic. "Dad, please don't make a big deal out of this," she begged. "I can handle it. If you step in, they'll only hate me more." Her father nodded slowly, respecting her wishes, for now. But inside, his mind was already working. Years of military training had taught him how to assess situations strategically, and he knew this wasn't going to resolve itself anytime soon. Still, he kept his promise and stayed silent, at least outwardly. Despite her determination to tough it out, the bullying continued to eat away at her spirit. She began dreading practices, finding excuses to skip them whenever possible. Even games, which used to excite her, felt like a chore. The joy she once found in cheering, the thrill of performing in front of a roaring crowd, was fading fast, replaced by anxiety and dread. At school, she stuck to herself, avoiding conversations and keeping interactions to a minimum. The friendship she thought she was building within the squad crumbled under the weight of betrayal. One person, however, refused to let her fade into the background completely. A boy from her math class, who also happened to play football, started paying attention. Let's call him the teammate. He wasn't close to her, but he'd noticed how isolated she seemed recently. After class one day, he approached her cautiously, asking if everything was okay. She shrugged, brushing off his concern with a weak smile, but he persisted, saying, "Look, I don't know what's going on, but you don't deserve whatever it is. You're too good for that." His words caught her off guard. For weeks, she'd convinced herself that she was alone in this battle, that no one cared enough to notice, or worse, that everyone secretly agreed with the bullies. Hearing someone stand up for her, even in such a small way, reignited a flicker of hope she thought had died long ago. She didn't open up to him fully, but their brief conversation reminded her that kindness still existed, even in places where it felt scarce. Meanwhile, her father wasn't sitting idle. Though he respected his daughter's request not to intervene directly, he couldn't ignore the situation entirely. Quietly, he began gathering evidence. He saved screenshots of texts she received, documented incidents she recounted, and even reviewed security footage from the school parking lot. Each piece of information added weight to the growing case he was building. He knew that confronting the bullies directly wouldn't solve the problem. They needed to understand the seriousness of their actions without escalating tensions further. As the weeks dragged on, the new girl found herself trapped in a cycle of frustration and fear. On one hand, she wanted to fight back, to prove to everyone that she belonged on that squad just as much as anyone else. On the other hand, the thought of standing up to the Queen Bee and her followers terrified her. What if things got worse? What if no one believed her? These questions haunted her every day, making it harder to focus on anything else. Her breaking point came during the regional championships, a major event that drew crowds from neighboring towns. The pressure was high, and the stakes even higher. Everyone on the squad had practiced tirelessly for months, and the expectation to perform perfectly loomed over them like a storm cloud. For the new girl, though, the pressure came from a different source. She knew the bullies were waiting for her to slip up, eager to use any mistake as proof that she didn't deserve her spot. On the morning of the competition, she arrived early to prepare. But when she opened her gym bag, her heart sank. Someone had swapped her lucky sneakers, the ones she relied on for grip and stability, with a pair 2 sizes too big. Panic set in as she frantically searched for another option, but none of the backups fit properly. By the time the performance began, she was already off balance, both physically and mentally. Midway through a complicated routine, disaster struck. While executing a high-difficulty flip, she missed her landing and tumbled to the floor, gasping in pain. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs as her teammates rushed to her side. Thankfully, she wasn't seriously injured, but the damage was done. The judges deducted points and the squad's chances of winning slipped away. Backstage, the Queen Bee wasted no time pinning the blame squarely on her shoulders. "This is why we shouldn't have trusted her," she snapped, loud enough for nearby teams to overhear. The words hit like a punch to the gut, leaving the new girl speechless and humiliated. That evening, as she sat in her room replaying the day's events, anger bubbled to the surface. For weeks she'd swallowed her pride, hoping the bullies would lose interest. Instead, they'd grown bolder, pushing her until she finally cracked. Enough was enough. She stormed downstairs, tears streaming down her face, and confronted her father. "I can't keep doing this," she sobbed. "They're ruining everything." Her father wrapped her in a tight hug, letting her cry until the storm passed. Then, in a voice firm yet comforting, he said, "You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone in this anymore." The fallout from the regional championships hit hard. The new cheerleader felt like she'd been punched in the gut, over and over again. Not only had she let her team down, something she took full responsibility for, but the Queen Bee and her clique had made sure everyone knew it was her fault. Social media blew up with comments about how unprepared and selfish she was. Even people who weren't part of the squad joined in, piling on criticism without knowing the whole story. It was as if the entire school had turned against her. For a while, she considered quitting altogether. What was the point of sticking around if all she faced was ridicule and hostility? She spent hours lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every mistake in her head. Each misstep felt heavier than the last, dragging her deeper into self-doubt. But then, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was her father's quiet confidence or the memory of why she started cheering in the first place, to inspire others and push herself to be better. Whatever it was, she realized that walking away would mean letting the bullies win, and that wasn't an option. Next morning, she woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. She didn't have a plan yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to stay silent anymore. At school, she kept her head high, ignoring the whispers and stares as best she could. During practice, she focused on perfecting her routines, determined to prove her worth through sheer effort. Her teammates noticed the change in her demeanor. Some admired her resilience while others simply watched in silence, unsure of what to make of her newfound determination. But the queen bee wasn't ready to back down either. If anything, the incident at the championships emboldened her even more. She saw the new girl's resolve as a challenge, a chance to assert dominance once and for all. One afternoon after practice, she cornered her in the parking lot. A few of her followers lingered nearby, arms crossed, ready to jump in if needed. "You're done," the queen bee sneered, stepping closer. "Everyone knows you don't belong here. You're just taking up space." The words stung, but instead of shrinking away, the new girl stood her ground. For weeks, she'd bottled up her anger, swallowing insults and brushing off cruel jabs. Now, standing face to face with the person responsible for so much pain, she felt a surge of courage she didn't know she had. "I earned my spot," she shot back, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Unlike you, I didn't whine or cheat to get where I am, so maybe the real problem isn't me, it's you." Her response caught the queen bee off guard. Used to seeing fear in her victim's eyes, she faltered for a moment before snapping, "Don't act like you're so perfect. We all know your dad pulled strings to get you here." The comment was meant to wound, to plant seeds of doubt in anyone listening. But this time, it didn't work. Instead of crumbling, the new girl laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed across the nearly empty lot. "If you really believe that," she said, "then you must think I'm pretty pathetic, because if I relied on someone else to succeed, I wouldn't be half the person I am today." Before things could escalate further, the coach appeared, calling them both inside. Reluctantly, they parted ways, though the tension between them remained, thick enough to cut with a knife. Later that evening, as the new girl recounted the confrontation to her father, she expected him to lecture her about staying calm or avoiding trouble. To her surprise, he smiled, a rare, proud kind of smile, and said, "Good for you. Sometimes standing up for yourself is the bravest thing you can do." Meanwhile, the father wasn't sitting idle either. While his daughter fought her battles at school, he began laying the groundwork for a bigger move. Over the weekend, he reviewed the evidence he'd collected, texts, notes, security footage clips, all pointing to systematic bullying orchestrated by the queen bee and her group. He knew approaching the school administration directly might not yield immediate results. Bureaucracy often moved slower than justice demanded. Still, he decided it was time to take action. On Monday morning, dressed in his full Navy uniform, he walked into Ridgewood High School's main office. His presence commanded attention immediately. Students stopped mid-conversation to stare, teachers paused mid-lesson, and even the principal looked startled when he requested a meeting. Word spread quickly through the halls. A Navy SEAL was here, and no one knew why. When the principal ushered him into his office, the father wasted no time getting to the point. Calmly but firmly, he explained everything his daughter had endured: the mayor, sabotage, the verbal attacks, the deliberate attempts to humiliate her. He presented screenshots of texts exchanged among the bullies, detailing their plans to target her during practices and games. He showed security footage of suspicious activity near her locker, proving that her belongings hadn't been tampered with accidentally. Most damning of all, he shared witness accounts from other students who had seen or heard parts of the harassment, but were too scared to speak up themselves. The principal listened intently, his expression shifting from shock to discomfort to outright alarm. By the end of the conversation, he promised to investigate thoroughly and take swift action against those involved. But the father wasn't satisfied with promises alone. In a tone that left no room for argument, he warned, "This isn't just about my daughter. It's about creating a safe environment for every student. If proper measures aren't taken, I'll involve local authorities. And trust me, you don't want this story making headlines." His words carried weight, backed by years of leadership, experience, and an unshakable commitment to protecting his family. By lunchtime, rumors were swirling throughout the school. Some students claimed the Navy SEAL had threatened to shut down the cheerleading program entirely. Others whispered that suspensions were imminent. Regardless of the specifics, one thing was clear: the tide was turning. The queen bee and her followers grew visibly nervous, exchanging anxious glances in the hallways and skipping practice sessions altogether. They hadn't expected their actions to catch up with them so quickly, or at all. That evening, the new girl came home exhausted, but hopeful. Her father greeted her with a hug, telling her, "Things are going to change now. You won't have to face this alone anymore." She nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because someone finally believed her and was willing to fight alongside her. Apprehension because she worried about retaliation once the dust settled. Would the bullies come back angrier than before? Or would they learn their lesson and move on? Over the next few days, the school implemented stricter anti-bullying policies. Posters went up in classrooms, reminding students to treat each other with respect. Teachers held discussions about inclusivity and kindness, encouraging open dialogue about difficult topics. Meanwhile, the queen bee and her accomplices were suspended pending a formal investigation. Their absence created a noticeable shift in the squad's dynamic. Practices became quieter, less tense, as teammates adjusted to the sudden change. Despite the progress, the new girl couldn't shake the lingering unease. She appreciated her father stepping in, but she also understood that true healing required more than punishment. It required understanding. Deep down, she wondered if the bullies truly grasped the impact of their actions. Were they sorry or merely scared of consequences? Only time would tell. One afternoon, as she packed up her things after practice, she noticed the queen bee waiting near the bleachers. At first, she tensed, unsure of what to expect. But instead of lashing out, the girl approached hesitantly, her usual confidence replaced by vulnerability. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, avoiding eye contact. Surprised, the new girl nodded, following her to a quiet corner of the field. I'm sorry," the queen bee began, her voice trembling slightly. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just jealous, I guess, of how good you are, how everyone looks up to you now." She paused, tears welling up in her eyes. "I messed up. Big time. And I don't blame you if you hate me." For a moment, the new girl didn't say anything. Part of her wanted to lash out, to make the other girl feel even a fraction of the pain she'd endured. But another part, the stronger part, knew revenge wouldn't solve anything. Taking a deep breath, she replied, "I don't hate you, but what you did hurt, a lot. And if you really mean what you're saying, then show me. Don't just apologize. Change." The queen bee nodded earnestly, promising to do better. Whether she kept her word remained to be seen, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. Maybe forgiveness was possible. Maybe growth was within reach, for both of them. The days following the queen bee's apology were tense, but they also carried a strange sense of possibility. The new cheerleader didn't trust her former tormentor overnight. How could she? Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt with just words, no matter how sincere they sounded. Still, there was a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. For the first time since she'd arrived at Ridgewood High, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things could get better. When the suspended girls returned to school weeks later, it was clear they were walking on eggshells. Their bravado had vanished, replaced by cautious behavior and furtive glances. The queen bee, once so quick to snap or sneer, now kept her distance from the new cheerleader altogether. It wasn't just fear of consequences, it was respect, albeit grudging, for the girl who had stood her ground despite everything thrown at her. Even the other students seemed to notice the change. Whispers still circulated, but instead of mocking the new girl, they revolved around how intense her father must have been during his visit to the principal's office. Some even joked about joining the Navy just to command that kind of authority. But while the bullying appeared to subside, the scars it left behind weren't so easily erased. The new cheerleader found herself second-guessing every interaction, wondering if people genuinely liked her or were simply afraid of crossing boundaries. During practice sessions, she hesitated before speaking up, worried her voice might spark conflict again. Her confidence, once unshakable, felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Her father noticed the lingering unease. One evening, as they sat together watching TV, he turned to her and said, "You're not alone in this, you know? You don't have to carry everything by yourself." She smiled faintly but didn't respond right away. After a long pause, she admitted, "I thought standing up to them would make me feel stronger, but it just feels exhausting, like I'm waiting for the next shoe to drop." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "That's because strength isn't always about feeling invincible," he said gently. "Sometimes it's about moving forward even when you're scared. And sometimes it's about leaning on others when you need help." His words struck a chord deep within her. For weeks, she'd tried to shoulder the weight of everything alone, convinced that asking for support would make her seem weak. But hearing her father frame vulnerability as a form of strength gave her permission to let go, to share her burden instead of carrying it all herself. With that realization came another step toward healing, reconnecting with her teammates. Before the bullying began, she'd dreamed of forming close bonds with the squad, imagining late-night sleepovers and inside jokes built over shared victories. Reality, however, proved far more complicated. Many of her teammates had stayed silent during the worst of the harassment, neither supporting nor condemning the bullies outright. To her, their neutrality felt like betrayal, leaving her unsure whether she could ever fully trust them. Yet, slowly, cracks began to form in those walls of distrust. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling practice, one of the younger cheerleaders approached her timidly. "Hey," the girl said, fidgeting with her pom-poms. "I just wanted to say, I think you're really brave, like way braver than I'd be in your shoes." The compliment caught her off guard, but before she could respond, the girl added, "And I'm sorry we didn't stick up for you sooner. We should have." It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough to soften some of the hardness in her heart. Over the next few weeks, similar moments unfolded, small acts of kindness that chipped away at the isolation she'd felt for so long. Another teammate invited her to join a study group. A senior offered tips on perfecting a difficult stunt. Even the coach, who had initially dismissed her concerns, made an effort to check in regularly, ensuring she felt supported both on and off the field. As these connections grew, so did her determination to rise above the negativity that had nearly broken her. She started focusing less on proving herself to others and more on enjoying the sport she loved. At games, she poured every ounce of energy into her routines, letting the music and cheers wash away the lingering doubts in her mind. Fans began noticing the transformation, cheering louder whenever she took center stage. By the end of the season, she wasn't just a member of the squad. She was its heartbeat, the driving force behind their most memorable performances. Meanwhile, the queen bee continued trying to make amends, though progress was slow and awkward. At first, their interactions were stiff, filled with forced pleasantries and hesitant smiles. But gradually, genuine moments began to emerge. During a fundraising event for the team, the two worked side by side, organizing booths and managing crowds. They laughed when a balloon popped unexpectedly, startling everyone nearby. Later, as they cleaned up together, the queen bee admitted, "I used to think being popular meant having power over people. Now I realize it just made me miserable and lonely. The admission surprised her, but not unpleasantly. For the first time, she saw the queen bee not as a villain, but as someone flawed, struggling to figure out who they really were beneath the facade. In that moment, forgiveness felt less like giving in and more like letting go, of anger, of resentment, of the weight she'd been carrying far too long. By spring, the dynamics of the squad had shifted entirely. The bullying incidents faded into memory, replaced by camaraderie and mutual respect. Practices became collaborative rather than competitive, each member pushing the others to excel without tearing them down. When the annual awards ceremony rolled around, the new cheerleader received 2 honors, Most Valuable Player and Spirit Award. As she accepted the trophies, tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Gratitude for her father, whose unwavering support reminded her she was never truly alone. Gratitude for her teammates who taught her the value of second chances, and gratitude for herself for refusing to give up even when the odds felt insurmountable. Her journey wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, of wondering if she truly belonged. But those moments no longer defined her. Instead, they served as reminders of how far she'd come and how much farther she could go if she kept believing in herself. In the end, the experience changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. It taught her resilience, empathy, and the importance of standing up, not just for herself, but for others facing similar struggles. She became a voice for inclusivity, advocating for anti-bullying initiatives and mentoring younger students navigating the challenges of high school life. Even the queen bee joined her efforts, eager to rewrite her own narrative and prove she could be better than her past mistakes. Through it all, her father remained her rock, quietly proud of the woman she was becoming. He often reminded her, "Strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every single time." And with each challenge she faced, she proved him right, rising higher and stronger than before. By the time senior year rolled around, the new cheerleader wasn't just a part of Ridgewood High. She was one of its defining figures. The scars from her freshman struggles were still there, faint but visible if you looked closely enough. But they no longer defined her. Instead, they reminded her of how far she'd come and how much she had grown because of it. The squad itself had transformed in ways no one expected. Gone were the cliques and power plays that once dominated locker rooms and practice sessions. In their place stood a united team, working together not just to win trophies but to support each other through wins and losses alike. Practices became less about perfection and more about connection, with teammates cheering louder for each other's successes than their own. It was a shift sparked by the new cheerleader's resilience, but it was sustained by everyone choosing to embrace change. One of the biggest changes came from an unlikely source, the queen bee. Once infamous for her sharp tongue and cutting remarks, she now worked tirelessly to make amends, not just with the new cheerleader but with anyone she'd wronged along the way. At first, her efforts felt forced, almost like she was trying too hard to prove something. She volunteered for every extra task, stayed late after practices to clean up, and even organized team-building activities outside of school hours. Some dismissed her actions as guilt-driven overcompensation, but others saw them for what they truly were, a genuine attempt to rewrite her story. Over time, those small gestures added up. During a particularly tough competition where nerves ran high, the queen bee pulled the new cheerleader aside before their performance. "Listen," she said, her voice steady despite the tension buzzing in the air. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I want you to know I've got your back. Out there tonight, whatever happens, we're in this together." For a moment, the new cheerleader simply stared at her, searching for any trace of insincerity. When she found none, she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she replied, her tone softer than usual. Those 3 words carried more weight than either of them realized. They weren't just an acknowledgement, they were acceptance. That night, the squad delivered one of their best performances yet. Every stunt landed flawlessly, Every chant echoed through the stadium with electrifying energy. And when the final score was announced, placing them in first place, the entire team erupted into cheers. For the first time in years, the victory didn't feel hollow or fleeting. It felt earned, shared equally among all who had worked so hard to rebuild trust and camaraderie. But beyond the trophies and accolades lay something deeper, a ripple effect that extended far beyond the cheerleading squad. Inspired by the new cheerleaders' advocacy for inclusivity and kindness, students across the school began organizing workshops and campaigns aimed at fostering understanding. Anti-bullying posters lined the hallways, featuring quotes from teachers, athletes, and even alumni about the importance of standing up for one another. One initiative, titled "Stand Together," encouraged students to share stories of overcoming adversity anonymously on social media. The response was overwhelming, with hundreds participating within weeks. Even the administration took notice. What started as a crisis involving one student had evolved into a movement toward lasting cultural change. Teachers incorporated lessons on empathy and diversity into their curriculums, while counselors hosted monthly forums for open discussions about mental health and peer relationships. Parents praised the school for taking meaningful action, though many credited the shift to the courage of one girl who refused to stay silent. For the new cheerleader, these changes brought a sense of fulfillment she hadn't anticipated. When she first arrived at Ridgewood High, she dreamed only of fitting in, of finding her place in a world that often felt unwelcoming. Now, standing on the brink of graduation, she realized she hadn't just found her place, she had created it. Her journey wasn't just about surviving bullying, it was about thriving despite it, using pain as fuel to spark positive change. Her father watched all of this unfold with quiet pride. He knew better than anyone how difficult it had been for her to face such hostility head-on. Yet he also understood that her strength didn't come from him or his intervention. It came from within. Over dinner one evening, as they reminisced about everything they'd been through, he said, "You know, life doesn't stop throwing challenges at us, but the way you handle them shapes who you become." She smiled, nodding. "And I think I'm becoming someone worth being proud of." Graduation day arrived faster than anyone expected. As the new cheerleader walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the crowd erupted into applause. Not just polite clapping, but thunderous cheers that echoed through the auditorium. Her teammates waved homemade signs from the stands, shouting her name until their voices grew hoarse. Even the queen bee, sitting a few rows away, wiped tears from her eyes as she joined in the celebration. It was a moment of triumph, not just for her, but for everyone who had played a role in her journey. In her valedictorian speech later that evening, she spoke candidly about the highs and lows of her high school experience. "When I first came here, I thought survival meant blending in, hiding parts of myself to fit in with everyone else. But I learned something important along the way. True strength isn't about changing yourself to please others. It's about staying true to who you are even when it's hard. And sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom to discover just how strong you really are." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, earning both laughter and tears. By the end of her speech, several students approached her backstage, thanking her for putting into words what so many of them had felt but struggled to express. One boy admitted, "I never told anyone this, but I was bullied too. Hearing you talk about it makes me feel like maybe I can let go of some of that pain." As she hugged him tightly, she realized her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to anyone brave enough to listen, learn, and grow from it. That realization filled her with hope, not just for herself, but for the future. Because if one person could rise above adversity and inspire others to do the same, then anything was possible. Years later, when she looked back on her time at Ridgewood High, she wouldn't remember the insults or the sabotage. Instead, she'd recall the moments that mattered most. The quiet nights spent talking with her father, the tentative friendships forged during practice, and the collective effort to turn hurt into healing. Those memories would remind her that life's greatest victories aren't always about winning. They're about growing, connecting, and leaving the world a little better than you found it.